The reason why we put on today's session was because when we look at wellbeing strategies, one of the biggest factors for success, or the opposite to success, is around the senior leadership team, how bought in they are to the wellbeing strategy going forwards, how they promote it on a continual basis and role model healthy behaviours. And so we thought we need to put on a session specifically around the leadership team for leaders like you, or people managers like you, or for people like you that want to get the leadership team engaged in well-being. Now, in terms of today's session, there's a little bit of housekeeping. So please say hello through the chat. The chat's already popping off, which I love to see. I will read every single message. If we can't get through to questions, then I'll reply to them personally, and I read absolutely everything within there. So any feedback is wonderful, but please ask as many questions as you can, because we have 3 experts with us today, and we're extremely fortunate to have their time. If you would like your questions to be read out without your name, just put brackets anon or anonymized at the end, and I won't read out your name within here. If you also like the live session, there's a huge amount of effort that the marketing team from Champion have put into this, and the preparation and the lead up to the session. Please tell a friend or someone that you think might want to join, a colleague or your leadership team, about Champion to join the next session, because we're putting these on every single month for people like you. Now, just one announcement before we crack into today's session, and this is one of the proudest things for me as the co-founder and CEO of Champion Health, is that we've launched Friends and Family Access, or we're about to launch in the next week or 2. And that means for every member that has access, and for you as employees, if you're one of the members of Champion, you can now share the platform at no extra charge with 3 friends and family members. And the reason why we did this was because across the last 2 years, and actually beyond the last 2 years, a lot of people have been struggling. And we had a lot of our members saying, I would love to purchase this. Can I purchase it on the App Store, for example? And that wasn't in our plan at the moment. So this is why we launched Friends and Family, to extend our impact. And if you'd like to find out more, then we would love to talk to you going forwards to extend the impact of the Netflix of well-being. Now, the topic today is all about why leaders must talk about mental health at work. And what I just want to share with you is a small bit of data from the Workplace Health Report 2022. So there'll be a link that will be populated in the chat in a moment's time. If you've not seen this report, it is absolutely fascinating. We're looking to inform public policy and research going forwards, and it's just first-party data to be able to justify the importance of investing in employee well-being. Now, we've pulled out a couple of the statistics, and this is a really interesting one, that at any given time, 24% and 22% of employees are experiencing clinically relevant symptoms, so symptoms ranging from moderate to severe, of anxiety and symptoms of depression. And that's having a huge impact upon the workforce. And I would question that's only at one time at the moment. Across the last 2 years, I'm sure many of us have dipped in and out, because we know our mental health and well-being is fluid as well. Now, in terms of the data of people that are seeking support, 9% are currently seeking support. So when we look at the data, and 24% and 22% are currently really struggling with their anxiety and depressive symptoms at the moment, only 9% of those people, so less than half, are currently seeking support. And 61% of people within our teams haven't sought support regarding their mental health previously. And again, we all have mental health. We all have our ups and our downs, and we want to really make sure that we can fly the flag high for getting people into support when they need it the most. And the final thing, and this is a really interesting one to discuss when it comes to senior leadership, is around that intrinsic link between mental well-being and productivity. And the data is extremely clear that low mental well-being does have an impact upon productivity and high performance within our organizations. And similarly, high well-being, high mental health, measured through a validated questionnaire, the Warwick-Edinburgh scale, actually leads to higher levels of productivity within here. And so it's not only the right thing to do for the people, it's the right thing to do for the business. So with no further ado, who I'd love to introduce for today, and we've got a bundle of energy, and I'm going to start with Sarah Restle and introducing Sarah. Sarah's had an incredible career already, leading with the Global Index for Mind. Sarah's background is just incredible, but her energy and expertise will match that as well. And now works as Head of Strategic Engagement at Wellbeing with Carrie. Sarah's also led with the Inside Out Leaderboard and will bring a huge amount of enthusiasm and experience to today's conversation. So firstly, welcome, Sarah. We've then got joined by Dr. Vicky Barnes, and Dr. Vicky Barnes has been had accolades from people like Richard Branson, so not necessarily household names, but Vicky has worked alongside organisations such as Samsung, Virgin Media, and is a clinical psychologist and really looks to promote positive mental well-being through positive psychology. And that's the founder of, and the name of her consultancy, Positive Wellbeing, I think really sums up everything that Vicky stands for, believes in, and we'll be talking about today of how to build cultures that flourish within our organisation. So again, a huge welcome to yourself as well, Vicky. And last but not least, Andy Holmes. Andy is the Global Head of Wellbeing at Reckitt. I wasn't actually too familiar with Reckitt before, but they have so many household names under the Reckitt umbrella. So the likes of Durex, Gaviscon. I've got a few more noted down here: Calgon, Dettol, Nurofen, Strepsils. And so I'm sure some of you have used the products when you've had a sore throat in the past. But Andy's responsible for leading with 40,000 people's well-being. And that's a really interesting topic that we're going to talk about how can we engage those senior leadership teams. So firstly, welcome to you all and thank you for joining. Andy, I would love to start with you in today's conversation to just discuss what is the role of senior leadership when it comes to mental health and employee well-being.
I think for me, and thanks for throwing the first biggie at me, Harry, I really appreciate that. But I think for me, the role of senior leaders is to set the tone, not just set the tone, but facilitate an environment. I think so often when we think about mental health and well-being, we focus on the individual and what the individual needs to do. And it's quite easy to forget that we are a product of our environment. So our environment triggers our mood, which is our body signal to our brain about our level of fit with our environment. And that's the first thing a lot of us experience when it comes to mental health. Our mood drives our emotions, and there's a real interplay there. So I think for me, as well as it being about setting the tone, it's about the lived experience in the environment that we create within a corporate organization. We as human beings, and please correct me, Dr. Vicky, we as human beings are the only species on the planet that can think ourselves into a bad place. You know, and if the triggers are there for us to do it, we will do it. So this environment that the senior leaders of an organization by default and quite often subconsciously create is ultimately the foundation of all of our mental health.
I think that's a wonderful summary to kick off with, and there's so much to unpick there. And I'd love to move on to yourself, Vicky, in terms of, would you echo everything that Andy said in relation to the environment being absolutely crucial for positive well-being for our people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Andy. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm a big brain geek. It sounds like you might be as well. So I love this kind of interplay between all of the lovely stuff that we just want because we just feel like we feel better, our gut instincts around who we've got around us and what our surroundings are like and how it makes us feel, kind of inexplicably really, but also linking that with the science behind it all, and exactly as you've just kind of started to talk about, Andy, how the brain's working. So I love reading research and kind of practicing with people that I work with around what's getting your positive neurons firing and what's getting those happy hormones flowing. And time again, we're just seeing that what's happening is if we create positivity in our minds and our environments and the people we're with, what we surround ourselves with, the language we're using. I'm constantly talking about this kind of thing with my clients, and it just works. It really does. And I love that there's a scientific basis for that feeling that we have when we just experience and know that we feel better because of some tiny little things that we've shifted and changed in our immediate surroundings.
Fantastic. And Sarah, would you echo everything that's been mentioned so far? I know what a big fan you are of really promoting well-being and positive well-being through the senior leadership teams.
Yeah, 100%. I think that I mean, I love the science behind it as well, and we operate at Wellbeing with Carrie from a very scientific basis as well, and know that you can change your brain chemistry really quickly, and you're in power of doing that. But your environment, as Andy was saying, is very much in control of that as well. And on the leadership side of it, one of the things that I constantly do when I'm speaking to leaders is to talk about it being they're setting the culture, but it's also not a one-off thing. So there needs to be like a consistency to their messaging that they want to promote, and a consistency to them making those safe spaces and creating that culture. So the leader part of it is an essential component in forging that safe culture where your brain can feel positive and happy and healthy, and where you can be at your best and most productive. And I think that it's lovely to be invited to this conversation. You know my passion for leadership in this. When I was working for Time to Change, and I was a program manager at Time to Change, working with employers to just implement that cultural change through a campaign across the board. Yes, we found that champions in the workplace were important. Yes, there was policy that was important, but the number one thing that would sustain change and make impactful change was senior leadership buy-in. And if you're not getting that buy-in to that, hey, we can create a positive culture, and hey, this is a part of me and a part of who I am as well, then you just don't get that sustained sense of goodness in the workplace.
I completely agree with you. And the chat, I don't know if you've seen it, it's popping off already. So it's wonderful to see everyone on today's session, and a big welcome. We've got people from Wales, North Yorkshire, so not far from my neck of the woods, Hertfordshire, and all the way through to London and Coventry. So welcome to the session, everyone, and what a start it's been already. Andy, 40,000 people, that's a lot of people to be able to support with their mental well-being. There's obviously a senior leadership team that are very high performing at Reckitt. How do you get those senior leaders engaged in something that isn't always tangible in relation to mental well-being? How have you gone about that? And I'd just love to be able to pick your brain on that topic, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of bits. I just wanted to respond to one question as well. There's a bit in there about, mindful-based stress reduction. And it has been popular, but I think the caveat I would throw on that, just before I come on to your question, I heard a great quote, which was, we all like to think that we're the president, but the reality is we're just the press secretary of our own brains. And it is so true. We love to think that we're in this, controlled state, executive function the whole time. And the reality is that a lot of the time we're not. In fact, we know from well-being that the first part of the brain that starts to deplete is our executive function, our level of self-awareness, our barometer with the environment, which is where we've seen, the sort of the negative behaviors start to immerse without us really realizing it. But I think for me, the question that you asked, the biggest trigger for me when you look at an organization of this size is that mental health is very often, I'm going to be provocative here, mental health is very often positioned and targeted at the people who are experiencing the ill effects of it, or suffering, or facing their own challenges. Now, you read some stats out before, the 24 and the 22%. My challenge is that if we focus on only the acute, the 60% in the middle of the bell curve that form the bulk of your population, that actually set the tone for the bulk of your culture, and are the opportunity for the bulk of the support, you're not actually connecting with. So, and the other piece is that a lot of us are working for performance organizations. Yeah. So unless we put these strategies in place where there is a performance upside as well, the danger is that they don't get traction and they don't have that sustainability. So one of the things we've actually done at Reckitt is we talk about mental health in the context of mental energy. We find it's a slightly less sort of negative narration on it, and people find it more aspirational to improve mental energy as opposed to try and fix mental health, which is sometimes the narrative people don't want to associate with. So one of the pieces around that, but the other piece is really helping senior leaders to understand, as Vicky said, some of the science, the fact that the science doesn't lie. There is a huge performance upside when you get some of this stuff right. And if you are only servicing the acute, it's a bit like being a teacher in school. If you only work with the kids who are struggling, the kids who have the ability to take on board more and to stretch and to set the tone and to be that positive injection of emotion and support are actually not going to be brought into the loop. So it's about servicing the breadth of your organization, but it's also about really grounding it in the opportunity that it represents for everyone, as opposed to it just being trying to fix the problems that you see immediately. I think one of the things right now is that if you look at mental health, yes, we're working with the 10 to 12, 15% of people who have problems at the moment. Yeah. But what's going to happen when that 60% in the middle gradually slide from chronic to acute? then we have a real problem on our hands.
And that's a message that you've sent clearly to the Reckitt team to be able to get them engaged. And I think a lot of people are saying in here, the concept of mental energy is a really interesting and powerful message and reframe within there. We've got people talking about the importance of a preventative approach towards well-being. Is that something that you really look to push, Vicky, and especially around the senior leadership buy-in to focus on that prevention piece and be as proactive as possible?
Harry, you know that's exactly what I do. So positive wellbeing, which is my business, is all about preventative and proactive mental health strategies for organisations. That's exactly why I set it up. And part of the reason was I spent over 10 years working in the NHS as a clinical psychologist. So I saw lots of patients and lots of teams really struggling and kind of under-resourced, over-pressured, overwhelmed, burnt out, struggling and suffering, and this isn't an uncommon situation. It's not just health services, but I think it's just something that we can all relate to, especially after what we've all been through for the past couple of years. And what I thought was, people need to be able to do small but effective things that don't take much time and don't take much energy, back to your point about energy, and be able to implement those into their day. And it's all very well saying, yeah, we're all responsible for this, which we totally are. So everything that I do is about the individual. However, I mostly work with senior leadership teams and exec teams, and I do kind of group and one-to-one sessions because people really need to really believe in this and experience it for themselves. So that's back to that feeling. So it's one thing to understand the science and get the models and the data and the stats and all of that, but I'm a big fan of having an experiential session whereby people can say, do you know what, that really changed the way I think or feel about this. Therefore, if I can feel the difference, I'm going to be motivated to make that change. And then that's the snowball effect in the organisation. And I think that rather than waiting for bad things to happen and then trying to climb out of the pit of despair, why don't we just do things every day that keep that baseline a little bit higher? Because this is what we can see, it's all about where our baseline is, and I won't go into it now because you haven't asked and I don't want to take up too much time, but we've all got kind of a baseline level of happiness, and then contextually things happen to us which affect that, but also we're in control of 40%, a whopping 40% of our happiness, right? We're in control of, and that's about this preventative, proactive stuff that we can do every day. And it doesn't take much. It's just knowing what works for us, knowing what works for our people, and then having the space and allowing people to integrate that into their language and their culture and everything that they do.
I'd love to ask 2 follow-up questions in terms of this, Vicky. So what can individuals do that have joined the session today, 124 people? What tip can we give them to be able to do something small, to be able to see that reward and that snowball effect, as you've mentioned? And the second question is for those that are senior leaders, what can they do, those small things, to encourage that positive behaviour change?
I'm going to keep this really simple. It's one of the first things that I talk to organisations about, and it's something that I call bookending your day. So I will always say start and end your day really well. So as an individual, if you can get up and go to bed on a positive, then your neurochemicals and everything's going to kind of follow suit there. So very simply, we've got what are called peak emotional moments in any given day, and some things we're not in control of because things will happen to us, whether they're good or bad or indifferent, and we don't really know what's going to happen necessarily. And there'll be a peak emotional moment in our day that is because maybe we've had a compliment, or somebody's been mean to us, or we've had a pay rise, or we've lost our job, or whatever it might be, and that will create a peak emotional moment which we haven't necessarily had control over. However, we have got complete control over how we start and end our day. So I say bookend your day, start it and end it well. And that might be, it's whatever works for you, but it might be a gratitude statement in the morning, or doing some yoga, or smelling a nice cup of coffee when you wake up, or having a good stretch, and going to bed on, I don't know, some nice music, or a chapter of your favourite book, or a podcast, or again, some yoga, a walk, whatever it might be. So that's on the individual level, I would say. And to keep it simple, on an organisational level, do you know what, Harry, I would do the same thing. I talk to leaders about bookending their meetings, bookending their one-to-ones, bookending their sessions, and bookending their day. So if you've got a space, if it's just 2 minutes to have a great start and a great finish, then all the other peak emotional moments will have some kind of part to play on how people are feeling, of course, but at least you've taken control of those two really important ones, which is the start and the end, which people do remember, and your mental health takes note of.
Fantastic. We've had so many positive responses in terms of that, and I'm trying to keep up with all of the chat. So thank you, Vicky. We've got loads of questions within here, which is amazing. I've picked one out from Katrina. So hello, Katrina, as well. Lovely to see you on the session. This one is geared perfectly for Sarah, without a shadow of a doubt. So what steps could you take to improve buy-in from senior leadership teams where you spot a lack of this when delivering on mental health culture? So what can we do to really get those senior leadership teams engaged with mental well-being and really driving the agenda forwards?
Perfect. And I'm so glad. I just want to say, I'm so sorry. I'm having a hay fever attack. And I realize it looks like I'm getting super emotional. I mean, I am a super emotional person, but I'm like weeping with agreement at what Vicky's saying, which is very true. I just want to say, in the interest of being open about how one is feeling, I'm sat here crying with hay fever, and I'm so sorry about this, but I'm so present for this. So in terms of what people can actually do, or how to actually get your senior leadership to have that buy-in, I think I've been really on. I've just been nodding along with what you guys are saying. So good. But what you said before, Harry, is that you mentioned that this is an intangible thing. And the thing is that when we think of senior leaders, we think of them as being, the core of things, or the intelligence that holds up everything, and they're almost robotic because they're delivering strategies, and the strategies are based on data, and that doesn't feel very human, but they are very human. And I do think it's tangible. So I do think that getting buy-in from senior leadership is quite easy when you start speaking in those terms, and you start understanding that if they themselves have not experienced poor mental health, it is impossible for them not to know somebody who has. It is some of the most incredible leaders on the leaderboard may not identify, on the Inside Out leaderboard, may not identify as having personally had the impact of poor mental health. They might be really super resilient and had nothing but good luck throughout their lives and not have experienced grief. But they might have a child with an eating disorder, or a partner who's had a really bad experience with postnatal depression, or they might have experienced their mother going through menopause, and that's had an impact as well. So I think first and foremost, appeal to the fact that they're human beings, 100%. And in doing so, invite them to touch base and think about that. So give them these examples, like, you might not have experienced poor mental health yourself, but I'm sure you know someone that does, and invite them to think about it and reflect on those that they might have had that impact from. And what you might find is that their love for somebody else will motivate them to increase their involvement and engagement in your wellbeing program. But the other side of it, and this is something that I've kind of taken on as one of my flags when I go forth into battle, is that it needs to fall under a risk assessment. It needs, if you're speaking to a senior leader and their general attitude or their thought process is, yes, that's for HR. Well, it's not for HR, it's actually for everybody, and it's under health and safety. And you wouldn't let, and I love, Andy, what you were saying about the well component, that we're not just focusing on those that are ill. In an organization, you don't just focus on the people that keep tripping over and breaking their leg on the crack and then cordon off that area and fix just that area. You ensure the whole building is safe. You make sure that there's not wires springing out of light switches. You make sure that their computers work so that they can work productively and well. What we try to do is set up our organizations where people are able to perform at their best. That's all the people. And a part of that is that risk assessment, that health and safety risk assessment that falls behind how people are doing health-wise. And I'm going to say health because it's health, physical, mental, social, financial, whatever's going on. You need to be in a good spot to perform at your best. And that part of it is tangible. And that part of it is a part of the conversation you can have with your senior leaders to get that buy-in.
Thank you, Sarah. I think there's so much that we can take away from that within there. We've got a question, Andy, and I'm going to target this towards you from Leanne, around some leaders switch off their human emotions when they walk into an office and their focus tends to be on the bottom line. How can we prove / demonstrate the return on investment as well as the value on investment? And that's a big topic that's coming up at the moment around demonstrating value on investment and the moral side of things. How have you gone about it at Reckitt in being able to justify the investment of time, resource and energy into mental well-being?
I mean, I think it's, and just I suppose to respond to some of the other questions as well, there's a lot coming through about emotions and displaying emotions and how do you get senior leaders to do that. There's a couple of bits I just wanted to pick up. Vicky mentioned things that we can do through the day. You know, I call these sort of millisecond lessons. So what are the things that happen 1,000 times a day that we don't take note of, but have an impact on ourselves and the way we frame the world, but also have a resonance with other people and set the environment that they then experience their mental health in. The bookending your day bit fits in nicely with this bit that I was going to talk to. One of the things that we've been focusing on is energy as we go through the day. So things like circadian rhythm. So one of the programs that we've had in place with our senior leadership team is about helping them to understand when they go through different phases of mental framing during the day. So at some points due to cortisol, they'll feel more acute, more focused, more deep thought. At other points during the day, they'll feel much more collaborative, open, amenable to other people. So we've actually got senior leaders to plot their energy levels so that they can start to identify and color code their calendars to say, this is the point in the day when I know I'm more receptive to other people and ideas. This is the point in the day where I'm more focused and want to be more in isolation, so that they can understand and have that level of self-awareness so that they can be the right person. The other thing we get them to do is to think about when they look at their calendar, rather than look at what do I have to do in each meeting, is think about who do I want to be in each meeting. So who do I want to show up as emotionally? But then to Vicky's point, at the end of the day, how do I round off the day? So if you think about, you know, the whole cycle between your day, your night and your day, the way you round off the day is critical. So who do you want to be at the end of the day? So for example, if I was to say to you guys today, who do you want to be? What do you want to be? You could be disconnected. You could be proud. You could be humbled. You could be accomplished. You could be sensitive. You could be present. You could be disenchanted. But have a framing for who you want to be at the end of the day. And if you can hit that more often than not at the end of each day, and it might be different each day, yep, it will set you up for a good sleep. It will set you up for a good morning. Most of the mental health problems, and Vicky, I'm hoping she's going to keep nodding, but it comes from dysregulation of emotion. It comes from our inability to rebalance, to equate with the environment around us. That's where the struggles come from. So, you know, we've seen a few things there in about aggression and things like that. Aggression is actually, it's something we do just like whether it's drinking or gambling or whatever else it might be. It numbs us from the emotions we haven't been able to figure out. So this sort of who do you want to be during the day is really, really critical. The even better if is if we've got senior leaders who have sort of said to themselves, right, in this meeting in the afternoon, I want to be open and collaborative, but they've had a really crappy morning. How good would it be if that leader can turn up into that meeting and say, I want this meeting to be open and collaborative. I haven't had the best morning, so some of my mindset is a bit closed. If you feel I'm closed, please challenge me and help me open it. Wouldn't that be the best environment for leaders to show up and create? Now, I know that sounds quite lofty, but it's about being human. If you rocked up with your best mate and you were in a stinking mood, you'd probably tell them you're in a bad mood. But it's that level of self-awareness, that consciousness that we lose when we're under-resourced from a well-being perspective. So these bits do all circle together, but the big bit I would say is think about who you want to be and then how that will resonate with other people, because that is, again, what I said at the start, that's how we set the tone and facilitate the environment that other people can thrive in along with us.
I've got so many questions to ask, and I might have to ask you some of them at the end, Andy. But I've got two specifically. One is, how important is role modeling? It sounds like that's something that's really key to senior leaders from what you've mentioned within there. And the second one is, how important is that authenticity to be able to bring your true self to work and to be human, as you mentioned? How important is that for the senior leadership team of organizations? So
there's two sort of subtle angles on that. Authenticity is a word that everyone uses all the time, and we all think we should be 100% of the time. As positive psychologists would tell you, being authentic 100% of the time is unrealistic. You know, it's an inbuilt protection mechanism. We can't be authentic 100% of the time. The thing I would encourage people to do is be congruent. Make sure that what you say and what you do matches up. Because if you look at what destroys psychological safety, emotional security, etc., and trust, it's self-awareness and authenticity. People need to see that people are self-aware and that people behave congruently with that. That's what builds trust. Trust gives emotional security and allows people the freedom to be open and be vulnerable. But if you don't have that congruence, then even if you have the authenticity, people will still smell a rat, and that becomes a problem.
And in terms of that role modeling element as well, how crucial is that the actions are matching up with the words? And
it's absolutely critical, because I think someone else mentioned in the chat earlier on, it's very unlikely senior leaders haven't experienced their own mental health struggles getting to the point they've got to.
Yeah.
The challenge is that generations gone by, arguably, I've had a number of people who've sort of said, well, we just learned from the school of hard knocks, so why don't people just get it? That's not necessarily inside Reckitt, it's across, it's at conferences, panels, whatever else. Different people respond and handle and manage these things in different ways. So it's important to try and drive that awareness in leaders that, yes, behave authentically, but also appreciate that other people may not deal with things the same way that you have done or you might. So again, it's about that openness and that awareness of, you know, the diversity that we bring to the table.
Fantastic. And Vicky, I've got a question, first of all, just to follow up on what's been mentioned, because I'm sure you've got so much to unpick in the conversation so far. My second question after that is then around how to have a conversation we'd love to hear from a clinical psychologist on this, around mental well-being, and especially if someone is struggling, how to not overstep the mark, but how to handle it in the right and sensitive way. But would love to just pick your brain initially on what's been said to begin with.
Gosh, yes, so much, Andy. I mean, I was like a nodding dog then, everything you were saying. Yeah, I mean, I'm in my book, I've got a whole chapter on authenticity and then a whole chapter on vulnerability, right? And I personally find the two quite hard to pull apart. And when I was writing about them, I found it really hard to know what I needed to put into the authenticity chapter and what to put into the vulnerability chapter. And the reason is because I think that humans are inherently with vulnerability, right? And we're really scared of that. We're afraid of uncertainty. We don't like feeling out of control. And there are loads of reasons for that, and that's all fine. But being aware of this and then acting and behaving with that awareness is key. And I think that's what you were kind of just getting at. And I suppose in my world, I'd like to bring another word in, which also can divide some people, which is that word of happiness, right? And I think that it's all about what makes you feel happy. And quite often we think too much, because as humans have got these massive frontal lobes, as you mentioned earlier, and we all overthink. We're all overthinkers. And what I personally think we need to do is to tune into that gut instinct a bit more, because we know when we need to show full authenticity, when we can show our vulnerabilities, and when we need to maybe just look after ourselves a bit, take a step back and do something slightly different, which I don't think is inauthentic. I just think it's about looking after ourselves and making sure that we're well and, dare I say it, happy. So, and that's quite a big topic, but yeah, there's so much I could say on that. But I agree with everything you said. I just kind of wanted to add that to it. And essentially, we know ourselves, but what happens is when we're children, we're really free and easy with our emotions, and we kind of express things, we feel things, and we manage our emotions in a perfectly a great way for ourselves. And then we learn to inhibit, and we learn to change and control, and we even learn in our society that negative emotions, and I'm inverted commas for anyone that might be able to see, negative emotions are bad. And again, in the book I've got another whole chapter about celebrating the negatives in inverted commas, because personally I think all of our emotions are telling us something. All of our emotions are actually good. I don't know whether anybody's seen the film Inside Out. It's a Pixar film, but it's all about the different emotions we have in our minds, and how actually if we're sad, we're sad. So, and if we're angry, we're angry. And if we feel guilt, we feel guilt and shame and regret. And they're all fine, actually, because they're all really, really important in telling us something. So what we need to do is we need to accept and know ourselves and be authentic in that, and express where it's appropriate and where we feel like we can. The other point to that is it does depend on who you are. And another point that people either like or don't like is we have personality styles. All of us have a personality. And whether you like the profiling tools or not, and Myers-Briggs and Insights and all of the great ones out there, whether you like them or not, it's true that we have personality. So I think personality profiling can be really useful in understanding yourself and your preferences, and then understanding and adapting to, and that's the important word, is adapting to other people. So if one person wants to come into the office and share, that might work for them. Another person doesn't have to do that in the same way to get the same emotional benefit. So leaders don't need to be making everybody talk about their mental health in a meeting, for example, because that won't work for some personality types. So we've got to make sure that there's enough that creates that safe platform for all types of people with all different kinds of preferences to be able to authentically and vulnerably bring themselves and what they need to bring into the workplace. And that obviously differs in different organizations with different types of people, of course. So there's no one rule, one size fits all, but it's a conversation to start having for sure. I think that's one of the most important things.
I completely agree with everything you've mentioned. And for example, someone struggling with their mental well-being within the organization, what tips would you encourage for our listenership today to be able to open up that conversation? I completely agree with everything that's mentioned of being as proactive and preventative as possible, but inevitably there will be a proportion of people that may be struggling with their mental well-being. What tips would you give to our audience today in being able to have that conversation and being open, being able to support not only themselves, but the people around them?
Yeah, sure. There are a few things that we can do. One of the things that I'm most commonly recommending at the moment is to have those check-ins. So just have a really quick mental health check-in, get it into daily normal language that's just a conversation about mental health, whereas how are you doing, how are you showing up? If you've got the types of people that are more, logical thinkers, you might want to scale on a 1 to 10. Let's all scale ourselves and just monitor where you're at. So are we going up, are we going down the scale, and make it kind of just something that happens every day. So almost like bookending your day, a mental health check-in at the end and the beginning of every day is also something that's really useful. But what I'd also say is I think that managers and leaders can struggle with feeling like they've then got full responsibility for everybody's mental health, and that's not the case. So I think it's about skilling managers and leaders up to a point where they have an awareness and acceptance, and they have their routines and what they do, but it's not their sole responsibility, and also they have their own mental health, as we've talked about before. And I think that there are a couple of things that spring to mind. One is there's a simple question, which is, how are you? And in our British culture, and I don't know how you'll feel about this, Sarah, but we just say, yeah, I'm fine, thanks, even if we're really at the bottom of that pit. So there's a campaign about asking twice, which you might have heard of if you Google ask twice. It's, well, how are you really? Like, are you really okay? Because I've noticed you're a bit quieter than normal, for example. That genuine question the second time round opens up a real conversation, and that's authentic to me. But only do it if you're genuinely in that mode of you've got time and you do care and you're kind of in that relationship with that person. And also I think that there's something really important about knowing when to help to fix and knowing when to just listen. And again, if you can't pick up if somebody wants a fix or an ear, just ask the question, do you want help fixing this, or do you just want to vent? And the person that's struggling will know themselves, and they'll know whether they just need to let it all out or whether they actually need somebody to take the load off. And can you just take this task off me, please? Can you help me work out what to do next? Can you help me sort out my priority list for today because I'm really struggling? Or actually, no, can I just get this off my plate and you just nod along and listen to me, and that will be good enough for me. And people know what they want, but we don't ask and we don't say either. So I think that question's a really beautiful one.
I think there's so much to take away within there. I look, and being of a gender and also age, that Calm, the calmzone.net, look to really promote men's mental health, and especially around suicide prevention. I remember a campaign that was around grow a pair ... of ears. And that was a really important campaign for my friends to start recognizing more about the importance of listening, active and reflective listening within there. Sarah, I've got a question that's going to come to you in a moment's time. I know Andy's just got something to add on top of what Vicky mentioned. I'd love to just pick your brain, Andy, on the responsibility, because what we don't want within our senior leadership team is them thinking they've got to solve all of the problems, especially when there's 40,000 people. Running a business is hard enough as it is. But where do the boundaries lie within that?
Well, I think this is, I mean, there's a lot of stats flying around, but you know, whatever stats you look at, a large proportion of managers or leaders feel it's their responsibility to be there, to show care, to show support. And one of our core behaviors at Reckitt is about care. The challenge is that a lot of leaders feel underskilled or undertooled in order to service that. The other thing that we've noticed is that at certain points in the organization, you have more proximity to the people that you lead. You know, that may be physical proximity, whatever else. But we are noticing that there are certain points in organizations where people are shouldering the load of that and not necessarily taking care of themselves. So one of the things we've been working on is we work with an awesome little organization called Heart on My Sleeve. But one of the things they do is they talk about real mates, real conversations, real stories, and they flatten it. So it's literally, it works on the premise that if you are struggling, you're more likely to select and choose someone you feel comfortable with and you trust. And that's not necessarily always HR or a leader or a manager or a senior leader. So it's about enabling and empowering everyone with the skills in order to support.
Yeah.
But the other piece that I just wanted to jump in on was quite often, as well as training and supporting the people to provide the support, it's also important that we help the people who are seeking that support to understand, well, how on earth do I do that? You know, I was in a really, a bad position last year. We'd had 2 miscarriages, a lot going on with work, lockdown, we had a baby, really tough, first couple of months. And the problem was that I didn't feel like I could reach out, even though I knew the support was there. It was like, well, how do I do it? How do I manage the day to day? How do I keep up appearances, be smiley? It was difficult. So one of the things that we've done is we've actually got a package in place to help people who are seeking support understand, well, is what I'm feeling normal? How should I process it? When should I reach out? How should I reach out? Who should I reach out to? So it's really important that we service both sides of that. Because sometimes you can have people who are waiting with open arms to receive people and are asking twice. That doesn't necessarily mean the person who needs it is going to feel capable to actually take that step. So I think there are 2 sides to that. I just wanted to dive in and mention on that, is that flatten the structure. Anyone can be a supporter, but also make sure that you're enabling and helping the people who need the support to seek it in a way that they feel that they can take that step.
I think that's a really important thing. It's something that I look to really promote, is people having the awareness and education across the organization and the emotional intelligence. So it could be the receptionist or an admin member of staff that you may want to talk to rather than a senior leader or someone in HR, for instance. And I think that's going to be a really big theme going forwards across our organization. So thank you for sharing that, Andy. Sarah, I would love to now come to you in terms of real life examples. You've worked with so many senior leaders on the Inside Out Leaderboard and at Mind. I don't know many people that know so many senior leaders as you do. What, in your opinion, separates the great from the good in terms of wellbeing promotion across senior leadership teams?
Wow.
Good question.
I just had a flood of my philo facts of great examples. I think, I mean, just to reflect on what Vicky and Andy have both been saying, so just to kind of pull together my thoughts on that does feed into great examples, because what you've been talking about is the ability to communicate, really, like people that are able to have that communication skill and that communication ability. I think one of my favorite examples was from an organization that we worked with, and they signed the Time to Change pledge. And this is way back in the day. So I was on the workplace wellbeing team at Mind and working with lots of organizations that signed up to this pledge. And one of the asks of the Time to Change pledge, which was to make speaking about mental health as normal as speaking about physical health. So what Andy was saying about that, was that Andy, that flattening of the message, that actually let's just make it safe to speak about. We don't have to educate everybody on this, but let's just reinforce that you can speak about it. And the Ask Twice campaign is from that Time to Change piece that we worked on. And having a senior leader stand up and pull together a meeting and say to all of his staff this is what we're doing, we're signing this pledge, but it's not just about a tick box exercise or saying that we're going to add mental health to the agenda. It's really important, and it's important to me. And then he went on to share his own personal experience in front of 1,000 staff members. And he said, you know, this is how I felt. I remember this one time I was going into work, and it was 10 years ago, but this is how I was feeling. And I would hate to imagine that any one of you out here would be feeling that way, and that you wouldn't feel like you had a safety net or someone to come to and speak to. And just watching him share his own experience was incredibly powerful. So that speaking openly in the right time, at the right place about your own mental health, and also ownership of mistakes. I remember being in speaking with the CEO of Lend-Lease, and his public statement, Lend-Lease being a construction company.
Yeah.
So all of the staff that were there, you know, this is that classic male-dominated environment where you just harden up, and we're all blokes here. And he was standing there saying that this was extremely important to him, because he will never forgive himself for the mistakes he's made, where he remembers once a member of, this is when he wasn't the CEO, when he wasn't a senior leader, he was managing a site, and somebody came into his office and they were in bits, they were in tears, and he didn't know how to cope with it, didn't have those communication skills. And he sent him away gruffly, like, I don't know what's wrong with you, mate. Like, why are you crying? Because he didn't understand how to deal with it. And that had lived with him to the point where he was like really trailblazing to make the changes, because he regrets those decisions. And I think owning your mistakes is incredibly important as well. And just one other thing, and this is a really recent thing, and this came from my own CEO, who of a Monday, this is very recently, so I think it was last Monday, she wrote to us all as a team, and she didn't write to us all with a like motivational Monday, welcome back to work Monday, yay everybody, this is what we're doing this week, really hyping and being excited, although we are hyped and excited. She wrote a reflective message to us all that just said, wow, there's so much going on at the moment. We have been running this marathon that we thought would be a sprint. I mean, that's a sort of classic way of describing how we've been through the last 2 years. And she just invited us all as a team to pause and to make sure that we reflected on how well we were going to take care of ourselves this week. And she just kind of really reinforced, and I think that communication and coming back to setting that environment, and I'm going to use a word that I want to kind of unpick a little bit, sorry to take up so much time, the word permission. Her writing that gave everyone permission to have a think and to stop and to notice how hard the last couple of months, couple of weeks, couple of years have been. And it was that permission was really important. And I want to sort of unpick that, because in our environment and in a lot of working environments that I work in, permission's not the word that the senior leader wants to give out. That's not a great cultural word, that you're waiting for your senior leader to give you permission to think about your mental health. We all have permission to think about our own mental health, but we still live in the structure of this British world and this understanding of what a framework of work is, and it's ingrained into us from our schooling that we have these structures and the teachers and the principals and everybody's got their hierarchy, and we still inside ourselves seek permission from others to take care of ourselves or to have a think or to have a pause. So yeah, there's some examples of some really good strong senior leadership in action, I think, and I think probably the one strand in common through all of that is sharing stories. So sharing stories is utmost.
I completely agree, Sarah, and I share my personal story with the team, and I share it regularly as well with our members around overcoming adversity and the fact that we are human, and giving permission to our team to be human, to make mistakes, and that psychological safety piece that we've mentioned as a theme throughout this conversation is really important. Vicky, I'd love to just pick your brain on remote working, and Andy talked about proximity. And proximity is something that's really important to be able to pick up on little cues and little social cues or body language. And obviously with remote working, that's harder now. It's something I found more challenging, and I'm sure many people have. How can we as senior leaders really look to promote the message of positive well-being, pick up on those cues with a remote workforce? Is there anything that you would recommend to our audience today?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, again, understanding that everybody's different, because a lot of the organisation that I work with are working really hard, bless them, with really great intentions to put things in place for everybody, to get everybody back into the office or have social time or whatever it might be. And you've got maybe half the workforce that are thinking, yes, crikey, finally I get to do that. And the other half that are thinking, actually, I quite like the setup I've got at home because it suits my personality better. So again, I think that's the first thing, is being aware that you've got very different people. And I'll go back to something I said earlier, which is ask the question. You know, we're so afraid as leaders to ask the question because it makes you sound like you don't know the answer. And as a leader, traditional leadership has been know all the answers, have all the answers, always know the right thing to say, don't show your weakness. Crikey, you wouldn't want to show a weakness. But actually, that's where the vulnerability comes in. And I do a lot of work on vulnerable leadership. And there's a reason for that, because I think it's not about exposing all of your deepest fears and your darkest times, but it is about just saying, do you know what, I don't know the answer to this. I might need help in understanding you, or can we have a conversation whereby you teach me how we need to do this? So I think that it starts with that kind of conversation and openness and flexibility around understanding people are different, and knowing that you don't necessarily know. And what we do is we assume that we see the world through our own lens, right? And even having an understanding that we've got biases and other people are different, we wake up, we've got our own lens, we've got all of our experiences, our histories, our backgrounds, our childhoods, our experiences and memories. And in that file of facts, which I think people in the chat were loving that you've got, Sarah, it's very impressive. A file of facts brain. Mine doesn't feel exactly like that sometimes, but we've got all that stuff in there. It's very hard to see that somebody could be completely different in what they need. So that's a really great start, I think. And you know, it is really just about having that conversation to start with.
Fantastic. And Andy, have you got anything to add on top of that? Obviously,
yeah. I mean, I'm just wondering whether you can still get the refills for file of faxes or not. If you managed to get your 2022 repack. I think one of the things that was jumping to my mind, Harry, was one of the big themes, or two of the themes I've seen happen through the pandemic. There's been a real shift towards, we need to talk about mental health. We need to, dial up the conversation. We need to ask twice. There's been some fantastic stuff. The flip side to that is at the start of the pandemic, where everyone really came together, there was massive cohesion and stickiness between people. And for me, where that came from was that everyone was imperfect. Everyone was just paddling around in the same pool of mud, trying to make some sort of way forward, trying to figure out what was going on. The first half of the pandemic, what that did was it endeared people towards leaders. Natural leaders rose up, but those leaders spoke inarticulately. They spoke imperfectly. They spoke with contradicting statements because they were trying to figure it out. But in the same way that comedians do, what that did was it endeared them to their audience. It made them human. It made them relatable. Then what happened was, as we moved into the second phase of the pandemic, what leaders thought, well, is we need to be clear. We need to give direction. We need to give, comfort and security to people. And so what we started to see across the board, LinkedIn, everything, was leaders standing up and delivering very polished and very purpose-led and very succinct statements, which were very structured. But what that did was it made these statements inhuman. It made them non-relatable. So what we've ended up with are these big, lofty, sort of purpose-led, intense statements, but then a gap between the lived day-to-day experiences that people have. For me, the opportunity here is for people to accept, and it goes along with what you were saying about vulnerability and authenticity and how do we pull them apart. For me, it's almost about, as people, we should accept that we're kind of middle of the road. Just to the right of middle of the road is where we should be. That's contentment, that's happiness, it's not euphoria. But if we can be that, be imperfect, bring your warts and your flaws to work and show them, but treat others with compassion when they do so, that's a much better place to be. So rather than being perfect and 100% purposeful and statement and succinct, be imperfect, be middle of the road, but be there with everyone else, and then we can all start to move forwards.
I absolutely love that message. It's such a shame we've only got 4 minutes left. So one of the things I want to do, I wish we had this for 2 hours, so it's 3 minutes now as well. One of the things I'd love to do is to just summarize the key messages that you would love for people to take away going forwards as senior leaders, or for people that want to promote this towards senior leadership. So Sarah, can I start with you with just a short summary on what you really think can be effective from senior leaders when it comes to promoting positive mental well-being?
Sure. Consistency is key. So don't just do things as a flash in the pan. And this is a health and safety message. This is an imperative. This is not a nice to have. And yeah, the narrative. Share your experiences. Be fallible. I love what Andy was saying. There's nothing more human than being fallible and noticing and saying sorry for it. It's the best trait.
And it's endearing leadership as much as anything. And they're the leaders that we would love to work for. Vicky, would I be able to come to you to get your lasting thoughts?
Of course, yeah. I'd say put things into place all of the time. Don't wait for things to go wrong. But if things are going wrong, give yourself some slack and just take the next small step. So one of my mantras is just take the next small step. I'm a big fan of, you know, the kind of space and the moon and the stars. And I just imagine kind of just slowly in your big kind of your spacesuit, just take that next small step on the moon. And that's an amazing, it's a giant leap, you know, but actually all you need to do is keep moving and just keep doing something. And you know, as long as you're not kind of stuck or going backwards, then I think that's the key. And as I said before, just have the conversation, just speak, just say something, anything, just have the conversation.
I absolutely love that message, and we've got Rob O'Dare buying your book as we speak as well. So that's wonderful. We'll make sure we do follow up with everyone with the recording first of all, and also any links to the audience's books and everything else, the wonderful stuff that we're doing. Andy, would I be able to come to you for the lasting remarks?
Yeah,
as well?
I think I was just sort of reflecting as we were sort of going through that. I think the first thing I would say is anyone is everyone. So I would urge people not to focus on leadership and who's responsible for this and everything else. You know, we evolved as communities that supported each other, and I think that's kind of where we need to get back to. So anyone is everyone, and treat everyone like that. Focus on who you want to be. So when one of our operations people had a great idea. When you open your email in the morning, don't look at your email, look at your calendar, and just think about who am I going to be today. It's a lot less daunting than 50 or 60 or 100 emails. So focus on who you're going to be. And then the final thing I think for me is this congruency. You know, don't, you know, be sort of someone that you're not. Don't make statements that lead people in a different direction and then you underwhelm them. You know, just be congruent. If that's middle of the road, if that's a little bit less, a little bit more day to day, that's fine. But just be at one with who you want to be and be consistent in that so that people can start to trust and start to open up with each other.
That congruency is a massive thing that I'm going to take away from today. I've always been talking about authenticity and healthy levels of vulnerability, and you've summarized it perfectly there, Andy. So huge thank you. I really mean a massive, massive thank you to the panelists today for giving up their time, their energy, their insight. It's been an amazing session to host. I've learned loads, first of all, and I think Anna has summarized it perfectly of be imperfect and treat others with compassion, the way that you would want to be treated. And I think there's so much we can take away from today's session. Thank you all for joining. The engagement within the chats has been absolutely sensational as always. We'll have another session in the next 3 to 4 weeks as well. And the final thing that I'd love to leave with as well, and I've not done this enough, is to thank our marketing team for all of their efforts as well, because there's huge amounts that goes on behind the scenes to be able to arrange these sessions, and they don't get the applause that they need. So thank you to Alex and the rest of the team for putting this on today. Thank you to the panel as well, and thank you to you for joining this really important topic going forwards. I look forward to seeing you shortly. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.